Hello and welcome to In the Roud. Greetings and salutations, dear listeners. This is In the Roud, a folk song podcast, and I am your host, Matt Quinn. Join me as we travel through the world of traditional folk song, one song per episode, in the order they appear in the Roud Index. Each episode will feature two guests, one providing an historical look at the song, while the other will be a singer from the folk music scene talking about their own version of the song. I hope everyone had as good a Christmas and New Year as they could have hoped for. I know that for a lot of people, 2025 hasn't started as well as might have hoped, but onwards we go. And we've got 3 whole seasons of the podcast coming this year. Season 3 now, obviously. Season 4 will start in around May, and Season 5 will come around about October. I hope you like child ballads. Across this year, we'll be covering 30 songs, and 29 of them are child ballads. In fact, looking ahead through the Roud Index, it's going to be very child ballad heavy for the next few years. The next time we reach a break from child ballads of 2 songs or more in a row will be during season 13 in the summer of 2028. So buckle up, everybody. It's child season. That just sounds like a very strange Looney Tunes cartoon. It's child season. No, it's Roud season. No, it's child season. I'm telling you it's Roud season. Child season. Fire! But I digress. Let's get started on season 3. Over the next 10 weeks, we will be looking at the next 10 songs in the Roud Index, and they are all child ballads. We've got Roud 21, Child 4, The Outlandish Night, Roud 22, Child 5, Gil Brenton, Roud 23, Child 7, Earl Brand, aka The Douglas Tragedy, Roud 24, Child 8, Erlinton, Roud 25, Child 9, The Fair Flower of Northumberland, Roud 26, Child 11, The Cruel Brother, Roud 27, Child 14, The Bonny Banks of Fordy, Roud 28, Child 17, Hind Horn, Roud 29, Child 18, Sir Lionel, aka Bold Sir Rylus, and Roud 30, Child 25, Willie's Like Wake. Can't wait to get stuck into that lot. So let's get going. This week's song is Roud 21, The Outlandish Night. Later on, we'll hear from our singer guest, Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne, and his version, but for now, let's take a look at the song's history with In the Roud regular Vic Gammon. Well, hello again, Vic Gammon.
Hello.
Hello. It's very, very nice to see you. And for a change, we're in the same room.
In the same room, in my little workroom up in Hexham in Northumberland.
That's right. I've seen this room quite a lot through through the Zoom window, but I happen to be up in the northeast of England recording something else for the Patreon, and then for one of the Patreon episodes, and I thought, since I'm in the area and I'm coming this way to see someone else anyway, we might as well do one of the upcoming recordings with you in the same room.
It's very nice to see you, Matt. It's very nice to be in person.
You too as well. Very nice indeed. Otherwise, it's just Whitby Folk Week occasionally.
Yes.
So
my rare visits to Sussex.
That's right, and even then I'm in Sheffield, so I don't get to see you there. Right. So how are you? How have you been? We've
not too bad. I got some sort of rash. Oh, you don't want to know about that.
Not really, no. It's fine. Our listeners want to know.
I'm a bit itchy at present.
Oh,
but,
I see. Well,
otherwise, okay. Pleased the snow has gone. My God, we were snowed up here. We're just here. We're just on the fringe of Hexham. We're 400 feet above sea level. And it, if we were above the snow line, basically, it can be no snow down in the town. Up here, it can be a foot thick.
Yeah, well, I've had snow my way in Stockbridge as well. We've had. I'm on a cul-de-sac, so my road doesn't get cleared or gritted really, and all the other roads in Stockbridge were fine, but mine was still pretty bad. To the point where I couldn't. This northeast trip has been delayed by 2 days anyway because I literally couldn't get my car off my drive.
Oh well.
But yesterday afternoon, I did get it off the drive, and I came straight to Newcastle and did some shopping.
Well, it's the home of civilization, you know that.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, so by the time I get home tomorrow afternoon, the snow will have vanished. But look at a different place. So yeah, we had you. We've had you a couple of times on the Patreon recently, and we did have you a couple of times in season 2. But here we are in season 3 already. I can't quite believe I've reached season 3 of this mad scheme, this mad project. So we're here today talking about the song most commonly known as The Outlandish Night, which is Roud 21, and it's Child Ballad number 4.
Yeah, Child calls it Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight.
That's our second appearance of an elf knight in this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't seem to be an elf in the other versions. I mean, I think Child's titles are sometimes a bit off the wall. And... I mean, it's widely known as the Outlandish Night, or May Colvin in Scotland, some versions, Castle by the Sea, For Sir John in Ireland.
That's right.
So, it has a fair number of titles, like a lot of these songs.
That's right, and I think in the sort of current folk revival, the Outlandish Night is the most commonly used title.
And it's the most common text. When you look through Bronson, it's mostly the Outlandish Night. Right. Interesting word. I mean, it's not a very usual word. I went looking in through the 18th century collection.
Outlandish.
Yeah. I mean, it means foreigner.
Someone from the outland.
From the outland, yes. So there's a certain suspicion cast by the very title Outlandish. It's not a word that's commonly used, and I went searching through the 18th century collection trying to find usages of it. And most of them are the modern use. We think of something outlandish, something strange, something almost unacceptable in a way. And I think that's meaning is there from early on.
Yeah, and it's odd because I think I've heard it occasionally, but normally, even if the title has the word outlandish in it, that word doesn't appear in the song that much.
It does if you got the first verse, an outlandish night came from the Northlands.
Oh yes,
that states it very clearly. But that's the only time. And the very earliest version we have, a broadside version, late 18th century, starts in what we now think of as verse 2. Go get me some of your father's gold. And some versions do that. They just don't have that introductory verse at all.
Yeah. Or you get things like, I'm very familiar with the version that Spiers Boden used to perform, or still do probably, and then they did it with Bellowhead on the Bellowhead's first album, which started off with the verse about Lady Margaret sat in her father's window, and there come a night, something, but it doesn't mention about Outlandish.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of thing. Marlborough and the Lily Bar, that's the version that from there. I remember that one. Anyway, start us off, as always. What have we got in this song? What's the story and the plot of this song?
I'll summarise the version I know, and it's really the most common English version. This night from foreign parts he comes to court a woman, and he obviously impresses her. He says he'll marry her and he'll take her to the Northlands and the place he comes from. And he requests that she gets him some gold and 2 horses. So he wants something for taking her, and she does that. She complies with him. One might say ill-advisedly. And they ride off. They ride to a place that's sometimes by the sea, sometimes by the water. Certainly water's involved. He orders her to dismount, and he just straight up says, 6 women I've killed here, and the 7th you're going to be. So that's a pretty nice
well, yes, indeed.
thing to do.
Yeah.
And so he then he tells her to take off her clothing because the clothing is just too good to rot in the sea. And she says, this is where she starts being a bit worldly wise. She says, well, if I must take off, and sometimes it's very interesting, this bit. Sometimes there's a bit of incremental repetition. It's take off your fine holland smock, take off your silken hose, take off your fine leather boots. You know, it can go into quite a lot of incremental repetition at that point. And she says, well, if I must take off these things, then turn your back. It's not fitting that such a young ruffian, a naked young woman, I mean, it's all right for him to murder her, but not to see her.
But the clothes are too.
The clothes are, you know.
Absolutely.
So he turns round, and in the version I sing, which comes from Sharp, he bent down over the brim. He's looking into the water, and she caught him by the middle so small and bundled him into the stream. So that's rather nice. She's actually taking a bit of initiative at last, having foolishly gone off with him. So he drops high, he drops low. He says, take hold of my hand, you fair pretty mate, and I'll make you my bride, which is what he promised in the first place. Some offer, you know. And she says, no, I don't want to. Lie there, you false-hearted man, lie there in the room of me. For 6 pretty maidens I have drowned here, and the 7th has sure drowned thee. So she's now in the upper position.
She's got the better of him, yeah.
She's got the better of him. So she rides home. She just takes both horses. In the version I know, it's not in every version. Sometimes a horse gets drowned in some versions. But she rides home, and it can end there in some versions, but in the ones that I particularly like,
a new character turns up.
A new character turns up, and it's the parrot. A parrot up in the window so high, hearing the young lady did say, what ails, my pretty young lady, you tarry so long away. She's been away 2 hours, I think, and it's 3 in the morning, 3 hours before day when they arrive at the seaside. She gets back to the house an hour before day, so you know. And then her father, who's up in his chamber, hears the parrot. What ails, my pretty Polly, you prattle so long before day. And then there's this wonderful request. Don't prattle, my pretty Polly. Oh, lovely, that alliteration is wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
Don't prattle, my pretty Polly. Don't tell no tales on me, and your cage shall be made of the best beaten gold and the door of the white ivory. So she promises the parrot. And then the parrot goes along. He thinks this is quite good to have a nice new cage, obviously, and says, it was no laughing matter, the parrot did say, but loudly I called unto thee, some cat had got up in the window so high, and swore that he would have me. And so then the girl thanks the parrot. She says, well turned, my pretty Polly, well turned, says she. Your cage shall be made of the best beaten gold, and the door of the white ivory. And I think I like that ending. I like the parrot because it's a rerun of the story itself. I mean, what's interesting is that in a lot of versions, both the parrot and the woman are called Polly. So the identity is pretty clear in a lot of versions. You know, the parrot episode is a sort of symbolic rerun of what has happened anyway. It's a sort of an explaining away of what has gone on, and I just find it quite satisfying to have. I miss it if I hear versions without the parrot, and there's some in tradition. I find it rather lacking, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah, it's just a bit odd, this parrot, particularly a parrot that can engage in conversation.
Yeah, well...
But I guess this is fantasy.
Crops up in other ballads.
This is creative writing, I guess, all these songs. Yeah. And therefore, the parrot can talk and have conversations. That's fine.
Speaking birds are not uncommon in the child ballads. I mean, Child didn't like songs that were just about animals, but he was all right with songs that interacted animals and people. Which is sort of right. Strange. But of course in Young Hunting you get the same verses towards the end. You get Come down, my pretty. So the woman has killed the guy in Young Hunting, and she then sees this parrot bird up in the tree, and she says, "Come down and your cage, the parrot's free," and now she's offering him a cage, and she says, "Come down and your cage shall be made similarly of, nice materials." But the parrot won't have any of it.
That's right. And Young Hunting, in fact, that's Child 68, Roud 47.
Right.
And we'll come to that in the middle of season 5, which will be at the end of this year. And look, my spreadsheet says you're doing the history of that one.
Oh well,
there we go. We've already decided that one.
It's a great ballad. I like the parrot ballads, and
the parrot. There needs to be a new. That's like the child ballads. Parrot ballad 3.
There is a wonderful thing called a concordance to the child ballads, and you can look up every ballad that has a parrot in it if you want to.
Oh, fantastic. I love that kind of nerd.
Anyway, let's get back to Round 21.
So yeah, the song, normally I always ask, was it particularly popular and widespread, and how common was it? I know that we found that the Roud Index has 980 entries, and that's quite significant.
That is pretty good.
Because I know it's as far as we know, the Roud Index kind of entries spread from, on the one hand, you've got Barbara Allen, which is almost 2,000.
2,000, so.
And on the Patreon, in a couple of weeks, with one of Mossy Christian's 3 choices, we're coming up to the song Between Whitby and Scarborough, around 21117, and that's got 2 entries in the Roud Index. So on the broad spectrum between 2 and almost 2,000, this having 980, it's
nearly 1,000.
That's not inconsiderable
bad at all. It's there. It's quite a actually very interesting what Child says about it. He says in his extensive introduction. I mean, Child is into the European parallels. The reason he considers this song at all is because of what he sees as the European parallels and antecedents. I mean, it's a late ballad for Child, and we don't see it before it's in Herd 1776, and it's in a broadside of about the same time, so it doesn't appear really. And I've had to try to have a look for it earlier, and I haven't found it.
Okay.
So it doesn't appear till well into the second half of the 18th century. But Child wants it in. He says of all ballads, this has perhaps obtained the widest circulation. He's wrong there. Barbara Allen is more. Yeah. It is nearly as well known to the southern as to the northern nations of Europe. It has an extraordinary currency in Poland. The Germans, low and high, and the Scandinavians preserve it in a full and evidently ancient form, even in the tradition of this generation. Among Latin nations it has indeed shrunk to very meagre proportions, and though the best English forms are not without ancient and distinctive marks, most of these have been eliminated, and the better ballads are very brief. So Child's reason for including it is really his knowledge of this, his vast knowledge of this this European sort of hinterland to the ballad, which goes back a long way. I mean, a lot of writers pick up on this. Bronson is quite interesting. His introduction, he says, this ballad, one of the most impressive of all ballads for the geographical sweep of its popularity and vital tenacity, nevertheless makes no appearance in the musical records until the end of the first quarter of the 19th century. So that's about 1820 or so, the first musical notation of it. But yeah, it's a popular ballad, there's no doubt about it. And the very fact you can trace it through the Roud Index and other collections, there's loads of versions, loads of recorded versions of it, which is pretty interesting.
And just before we started recording, we were talking about it was quite international, wasn't it? There's a lot of American versions.
Yeah, no, if you look at the Roud breakdown, I've got the Roud breakdown here.
Good name for a tune, the Roud breakdown.
It sounds like a dance tune, doesn't it? Roud's not. Stephen's not into dance tunes that much, I don't think. Anyway, USA 395 versions, nearly 400 versions of the 980. So England 293 versions. No, always we have to have the caveat. There's duplicates in the Roud because of it's in manuscript and it's in
a book of things published of that
and it's on a
manuscript.
record. You know, it can be 3 entries for one song easily.
Yeah.
But so it's widespread. So 395 USA, 293 England, Canada 68, Scotland 45. Some of the early interesting versions are Scottish. Ireland 32, Northern Ireland 8, England and Ireland. There's otherwise it's little numbers in. Well, even one Australian version of it. So
Wow.
It gets about. It really gets. It's popular. There's no doubt about it. I must say, it's one of my favourite songs. What I like, whenever I've performed it, and it really is whenever I've performed it, when she pushes him into the stream, there's always a hooray from the audience. I mean, there's always that moment of triumph. She's in absolute jeopardy on the one hand, and she turns the situation. I've never known an audience not react to it. It's quite interesting. And they follow the story. It would be they young kids or older audiences. I've sung this to children and got that reaction, They're sort of waiting at the...
We'd love to see some comeuppance being served,
yeah,
don't we?
Yeah, that's right. So there we are. So yes, I think this is a pretty popular song.
So how far back can we trace this? Did you say the second half of the 18th century? Was that what you
there's an
said?
English broadside that's in the Roxburgh collection. They date it maybe 17. It's a bit difficult to know, but 1765, something like that. It's in David Hurd, the Scots Collector's collection, and Hurd's version is in Child. It's in there, and so really we don't know it until the second half of the 18th century. It's no appearance. So where it comes from, God knows. I mean, maybe it is. I mean, ballads do get translated. I mean, the wonderful example I came across that was when I was reviewing some of the Alan Lomax collection, and there you found a few English ballads translated into Cajun French. So, they're quite clearly the English ballads, but, so they are, the language barriers are permeable, so I do think there's a strong possibility it comes from one of these.
Absolutely. I mean, we had that on end of season 1 when we had the episode on Lord Randall, which was Roud 10, Child 12, because Martin Nail did the history for that one, and he mentioned there were some very, very old versions from Italy that mention I was so pleased to find that out, because it mentioned the character of the notary, which is why you get verses about the bequests. Who will you leave? What will you leave to your sister and mother? And we get that because in some versions he called for a notary because he knew he was dying, and the notary seems to have been missed out of all the English versions. And I always think one day I must learn a version of Lord Randall and put a verse about a notary in there, just so that you get a bit more of a continuity. But that's from very early Italian versions. So it's
the story. I mean, this go back to the Outlandish Night. The story is old. It's known best in its European parallels as Bluebeard, the story of Bluebeard. Bluebeard, it first comes into literature, I think, with Perrault, the fairy story writer, late 17th century French. But it's there long before. And he we're talking about a serial killer here. I mean, this is a song about a serial killer.
Indeed, he's killed 6 already.
This is Jack the Ripper. This is, any one of the serial killers you want to name. Bluebeard, what he does, he marries everyone, and then he kills them, and then he just shoves them in a room in his castle, and he goes away, and he says to his, his 7th wife, I think it must be, don't, here's the keys to the castle. Well, don't use that one. Don't you dare use that one on that room. And of course, is this a warning about the curiosity of women? I don't know, but she does. And of course, she finds the bodies of all the other wives. So it's pretty gory. I mean, Bartok made a whole opera out of this. It's one of the few operas I've listened to. I like it.
There's a tangent. There is a very excellent scruple comedy from the late 1930s with Gary Cooper, I think, called Bluebeard's Eighth Wife. As a fantastic series of set pieces involving pyjamas and all sorts. It's really marvellous film. If anyone wants a good laugh, Bluebeard's Eighth Wife, great film.
So, you can trace this stuff back. I mean, Lloyd goes on about it. I've got Lloyd's Folk Song in England here, and he's got a few pages on it, just to have a quick look through it. So he's talking about medieval Scandinavian German origins have been sought for this ballad, all from Finland. Perhaps it was composed by a Dutch person. Recent researches of a Hungarian scholar, Leos Vargas, take us much further eastward and further back in time. In many versions, a curious detail stands out. The eloping couple come to a tree, and the man persuades the girl to dismount. He begs her not to look in the tree and lays his head on her lap so that she may delouse him. That's a lovely...
Oh, okay.
Do you do that with your girlfriend? I mean, there we go. While she is at this friendly task, he falls asleep, and she, glancing upwards, sees either his victim or his blood-stained weapon hanging from the tree. Generally, in British tradition, this vivid scene is lost, although its shadow remains in one Scottish version. Oh, sit down a while, lay your head upon my knee, that we may hasten rest before that I die. She stroked him so fast, the nearer he did creep. With small charm she lulled him fast asleep. Now, I mean, this is all very well. This is Lloyd in full flow, and he was a good writer, a good journalist. As much as his reputation has sunk a lot recently because of the way he was economical with the truth about his versions. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, of course.
But of course, I mean, what did that matter to any of the singers? I mean, all of our stuff. Today's a Tuesday. Any idea why it's called Tuesday?
No,
right, good. I mean, that's a good answer. It's named after a Scandinavian god of war called Tu.
Well, I know about Thursday because of Thor's Day, and so obviously I could have made an educated guess at Tuesday, but I wouldn't have known.
That's
exactly,
right.
But,
I mean, we inherit stuff that, in terms of its meaning, in terms of its history, it's sort of redundant. It's useful to us. I mean, what is Tuesday useful for? You know what you're doing on Tuesday. You know what you're doing on Thursday. It's a label we hang things on. So I think a lot of the origin theory stuff of old folklore, I mean, it's sort of interesting. Often gets rather speculative. It often gets, this is the sun god. And so, there's wonderful ideas of 19th century folklorists. But really, it has very little bearing on why the outlandish night survived since the 18th century at least, why people enjoyed it, why it was sung, why it goes on being sung. I mean, you're going to use a very nice recording of it. Actually, there's no West Indian indication in the Roud Index, is there? But
actually not, no.
We just listened before we started recording to a recording that you're going to use by Cohen.
Yes, so I'll talk to Cohen about this later, obviously. But his version is on his latest album, which is called Play Up the Music, and it's very specifically that album is English folk song in the Caribbean and Black America. Yeah. So we'll come very much to the, I assume, to the history of that particular version, because I'm sure Cohen has done that. But
what an interesting topic as well. I mean, certainly. Black performers in the States, that's where I've come across it. But working on Barbara Allen, there were, newspaper reports of African American people singing Barbara Allen, which is sort of interesting.
I was 1 year too late to take your module on that on the folk degree. I think by the time I came to be in the year group where I could take that, you just retired, I think, and so I never got to take your Music of the Southern States module. But
that's interesting. And of course, the Caribbean, there are Mama's plays performed in the Caribbean. I mean, colonisation is like that. What do you take with you? Well, you can't take much in the way of material goods. You take your if you like, your intellectual property, if that's not true, the culture you remember. And of course, that then crosses racial boundaries and so on, and gets taken up. So I mean, that's culture. Culture is this process.
And music gets sort of transported by boat, essentially, not just the shanties, but other songs, because people take their music with them.
Yeah,
one of my favourite recordings is, I mean, it's probably available somewhere now, but I remember back in the 1990s, I think Martin Carthy did 6 half-hour radio programmes for the BBC just on music he liked listening to. And he did one on female singers, one on guitarists, and some general stuff. And one of the ones he played was this song from the Caribbean, I think from the Caribbean somewhere, which was quite different in it from what I'm relating it to, but you listen to the words and some of the melody, it's quite clearly the song the Watersons used to sing, the Sleep On Beloved.
Yeah.
And it's clearly the same song. I bid you good night, good night, good night.
I think that's a Moody and Sankey hymn, so you get this wonderful progression that, of course, because of the idea of making the quotation marks native or slave population Christians, you would present them with Christian hymns, and they would then interpret them in their own way. I mean, I had a student once when I was at Sussex who had lived in the South Sea Islands, and they have a tradition of singing the Messiah in the South Sea Islands, but the women sing bass parts. They train their voices to go that low, and she played me some recordings. They were outrageously interesting. This is culture. It's never set. It's never one thing. Culture is a constant process of development and interaction, and some stuff gets lost and some stuff takes its place. That's what culture is. It never stands still.
Absolutely, and I think, as we've said before, the Roud Index is phenomenally useful, and all power to Steve, but it only encompasses the sources that he has indexed. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of stuff that he's not come to, or may never come to, or may not be aware of its existence. But it's still... and therefore, we haven't got ways of seeing about West Indies and Caribbean sources in the Roud Index particularly, but... So, it's interesting.
The Roud Index is a journey in a way. I mean, in as much as it gives you some wonderful signposts and waymarks, it's tremendous. I mean, it of its nature, it can never be finished. I mean, it's just the nature of the thing. I think it's wonderful that he's embarked on something like that.
55 years now this year he's been doing it.
Wow.
He started in 1970.
That's a librarian for you. The tenacity is just so impressive.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if I'm still doing the podcast in 55 years. 54 years.
I think I might not be that. I have a few years on.
Well,
you.
I'm 35, so I'll be 90 then. We're not sure. But anyway, so with regards to sort of the development of this song over time, and the... more or less any version you hear now sung by a singer on the kind of folk scene now, it's pretty much the same plot, give or take the parrot. And we'll take the parrot. No, we'll give the parrot. We like the parrot.
We like the parrot.
But then, has that been translated or developed over time, or is that more or less the plot of these earliest versions?
Not much. The interesting version,
apart from the delousing in some other countries.
The interesting difference that I've noticed is that sometimes the couple go into the water together, he on horseback and she on, like on foot. I think that's my impression. And
that's certainly what's in Cohen's version.
That's in Cohen's version, and that's also in one of the early Scots versions that's in Child. And she sort of pulls him off the horse and drowns him, and drowns the horse in the Scottish version.
Wow.
Generally, I think that broadside version of the late 18th century sets the template, and they're all much the same. I don't think, like in some ballads, there's enormous changes take place. I don't think there's that much, certainly in the English versions. I mean, there are variants. you get the Scottish is May Colvin, and we'll talk about some of the versions. There's a lovely version by a man called Watty Wright on the Kist website. Lovely singing, but quite different from a lot of the recordings made of the English version are quite upbeat, quite up-tempo, and Wright sings it in a very measured way that's quite interesting.
Yeah, so whether it's a major tune or a minor tune, it's all quite up-tempo sometimes.
It tends to be. I mean, it's an exciting story, really, isn't it? You know,
it's an exciting story, and it's a very sort of cleanly defined story and quite cinematic, actually, in a way sometimes.
Yes, I was just thinking looking at you here.
You know me too well. I imagine for a lot of people who might learn the song, their mindset probably is, why bother changing it?
Yeah.
Because it's so complete.
Yeah.
Whether you use the parrot or not, it's quite a complete song, and it goes through stages and plot twists and all sorts. And
it's a classic story.
Yeah, there's not much point in changing anything.
There's the journey outward. There's the revelation of what is actually going on. There's the reversal that the woman engineers by her agency. There's the journey back, and then the wonderful coda of the. It's a sort of coda, really, because it really does sum up the story. And I do like the parrot. I would not sing it without the parrot.
Well, I was going to ask, I don't know if we've done the research on this, do we know what the earliest version is that contains the parrot? How far
I think
back?
The earliest broadside.
Does it actually include the parrot in the earliest one?
Yeah. This is I've got here the text of the 1765 ballad in Roxburgh.
All right.
And it's the interesting thing. It starts in what we might think of as the second verse. Go fetch me some of your father's gold. That's the first line. There's no outlandish knight came from the Northland. So she fetched him the gold. They leap on the milk white steed and the dapple grey. They rode to a fair river's side. And he says, "Light, light, oh light, you lady gay. O light with speed I say, for 6 knights' daughters I have drowned here, and the 7th, and you the 7th must be." There's a really nice line here. Go fetch the sickle to crop the nettle that grows so near the brim. I love that. Go fetch the sickle to crop the nettle. I mean, I love that poetry of that.
I might have to learn a version of this and include some of those lines.
This is the early broadside. So he fetched the sickle to crop the nettle. Because she says, go fetch the sickle to crop the nettle that grows so near the brim, for fear it should tangle my golden locks or freckle my milk-white skin. He fetched the sickle to crop the nettle that grew so near the brim, and with all the strength that pretty Polly had, she pushed the false knight in. So this is a bundling in, pushing over the brim.
And her name is Polly.
Her name is Polly there in that one, yeah. So swim on, thou false knight, and there bewail thy doom, for I don't think thy clothing too good to lie in a watery tomb. So she reverses. I mean, he said, take your clothing off, it's too good. I don't think your clothing's too good. You can keep it on. And so she leaps on her steed, and she leaps on the milk-white steed and leads the dapple grey. That's interesting, because sometimes it's the knight or the man who rides the milk-white steed, and she on the dapple grey, and she reverses that. So the power is reversed symbolically by the horse that she that she rides. And then she rode till she came to her father's house 3 hours before it was day in this version. Who knocked so loudly at the ring? The parrot he did say. Oh, where have you been, my pretty Polly, this long summer's day? Oh, hold your tongue, parrot. Tell no tales of me. Your cage shall be made of beaten gold, which is now made of a tree. You see, it's got a wooden cage. It's going to have a golden cage.
The parrot is calling her Pretty Polly.
Yes.
That's not, because in nowadays we call parrots Pretty Polly.
I know.
I don't know. Would this potentially be the origin of why we call parrots Polly?
I don't know.
You don't know? No.
I mean,
probably not. But it's an interesting connection that in a song of this history of this reaching back in time, that even in the late 1800s, parrots
Yeah.
and the name Polly are closely linked. I want, we need someone to do the research into when's the earliest mention in any kind of literature or printed source of parrots being referred to as Polly. How far back?
That would be very interesting,
but we
wouldn't
know
it?
that it comes at least back to this song.
It's back to the 1760s or thereabouts.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
There's just two more verses. See, the father hears this conversation between the woman and the parrot. Oh, then bespake her father dear, as he on his bed did lay. Oh, what's the matter, my parrot, that you speak before it is day? The cat's at my cage, master, and sorely frighted me, and I called down my Polly to take the cat away. Isn't that nice? I love that.
Yeah, so the version that I am, I guess, most familiar with is the one that was on the first album by the band Bellowhead, and was previously on the second album by John Spiers and John Boden, and that's got a melody that they claimed was written by Martin Carthy, but I know recording of Martin Carthy singing it with that melody. But and there's recordings of Martin singing Outlandish Night, but not with that melody.
Right.
But I'm not sure where that melody came from. But there, that includes the parrot and Lady Margaret in that one, rather than Pretty Polly. Than Polly.
Yeah, there are some versions in which both the parrot and the woman are called Polly.
But in that one, it's Margaret and Polly. The parrot is Polly, and the lady is Margaret. Yeah. But that includes the parrot, and it's So that's the parrot asks, "Why have you come? Where have you been?" And the father overhears the parrot saying, "Why are you prattling and prattling?" And Lady Margaret says, if you do not tell the tales on me, and your perch shall be made of the best glittering gold, and your cage of the best ivory, I think, or maybe the other way around, the cage of gold and the perch of ivory. Yeah. And then instantly the parrot says, "Oh, there come a cat to my window side, and it's Marber and the Lily Bar." And something like, and I called the lady to come here to frighten that pussy cat away, and it ends there, So
that sort of thing gets out of the situation.
Anything else?
Well, I'd really like to say something about the example of this ballad cropping up in literature, because it does in a famous, quite a famous book, which I've got here, Flora Thompson's Lark Rise to Candleford.
Oh yeah.
Don't judge it by that awful bloody TV series that was on. It was a travesty of the.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah. So this is Lark Rise was published in the 1930s, first of all, and it's an account of a small hamlet in Oxfordshire. When she was a child, it goes back to her childhood, and she remembers the 1880s, which is crucial. And one chapter, there's just this fabulous. I mean, there's lots of interest. It's a book that's well worth. If you're interested in English social history, it's a book that's well worth reading, because there's a lot of detail in it about what life was like. And one of the absolutely fascinating bits is it's a chapter called Chapter 4, At the Waggon and Horses, and it's an account of a singing session, and it is absolutely fascinating. Now, how much of it is actual memory, how much of it is literary reinvention? I mean, there's an open question there, but I've no doubt that it's true to the spirit. And she remembers as a kid hanging round the door of the pub, listening to what was going on. And maybe we'll just have a look through it. You can always cut some of this out. The 1880s is a crucial time. Things are changing quite a lot. I mean, English agriculture has gone into a big depression in the 1870s. Everything, you've got railways by then. You've got the development of, urban industrial society. There have been more people living in town since about 1851 than live in the countryside. Before that, the population is dominantly rural. So there's been 30 years of dominantly urban living. and things are changing, and she's really reflecting on that in the book, as well as giving this, I think, quite amazing account of this singing session. And what if anybody's involved in the folk revival, the interesting thing when you come to read it is the familiarity of a lot of what is going on. Let me just take you through it. So she says, I mean, I won't read it all, but she says, the world was at the beginning of a new era, the era of machinery and scientific discovery. Values and conditions of life were changing everywhere. And of course, the 1880s is the very decade that the really significant collectors of English folk songs start work. Baring Gould down in Devon and Cornwall. Lucy Broadwood produces her first book, which her uncle had done in the 1840s, but there's a new interest in it. So her Sussex songs is a rework of her uncle's John Broadwood's material. Frank Kidson, of course, produces these books. All come out in the late 1880s or early 1890s. So this is also the period at which the folk song movement, as we know it, is getting going. But
right,
she sees it from the other end. So she talks about railways, bringing distant parts of the country near, newspapers coming into the home, machinery superseding. Horizons were widening. A stranger from a village 5 miles away was no longer looked upon as a foreigner. So she says, side by side, but, this is interesting, but side by side with these changes, the old country's civilization lingered. Traditions and customs which had lasted for centuries did not die out in a moment. And she talks about state education and the way that's changing children and so on. Men and boys still sang the old country ballads and songs as well as the latest music hall successes. So when a few songs were called for at the Wagon and Horses, the programme was apt to be a curious mixture of the old and the new. And she then talks about the young men singing the latest sort of musical songs. Over the Garden Wall, Tommy Make Room for Your Uncle, which instrumentalist plays a melodeon tune, Two Lovely Black Eyes, and other comic or sentimental songs of the moment. The most popular of these would have arrived complete with tune from the outer world. Others, culled from the penny songbook, though most of them carried, would have to have a tune fitted to them by the singer. So an interesting sort of observation of process there,
Yeah.
You had the words, but not the tune. You made it up. They had good lusty voices and bawled them out with spirit. There were no crooners in those days. Remember, she's writing in the 1930s about the 1880s. This is the age of Bing Crosby and so on. Not I quite like Bing Crosby, but they crooned into microphones. They didn't have to sing out like you do in a pub. The men of middle age inclined more to long and usually mournful stories in verse, of thwarted lovers, children buried in snowdrifts, dead maidens, and motherless homes. Mary Across the Wild Moor, songs like that she's referring to. Sometimes they would vary these with songs of a high moral tone. So actually someone would sing a hymn in the pub. But this dolorous singing was not allowed to continue long. Now all together, boys, someone would shout, and the company would revert to the old favourites. One of these was the Barley Mow. Trolled out in chorus, the first verse went, "Oh, we were drunk out of our noggin, the boys will drink to the Barley Mow." And she quotes at length a version of the Barley Mow. They went on, increasing the measure in each stanza from noggins to half pints, quarters, gallons, barrels, hogsheads, brooks, ponds, rivers, seas and oceans. The song could be made to last a whole evening, or it could be dropped as soon as they got tired of it. So, another favourite for singing in chorus was King Arthur. A favourite for outdoor singing as well. Was often heard to the accompaniment of the jingling of harnesses and the cracking of whips as the team went afield. It was sung by solitary wayfarers to keep their spirits on dark nights. And this is when good King Arthur first did reign, he ruled like a king. He brought 3 stacks of barley meal to make a plum pudding. So she's quoting that song.
Right, yeah, that's the 3 Jolly Rogues of Lynn song, isn't it?
That song. Then Lukey, the only bachelor of mature age in the hamlet, would oblige with, "Me father's a hedger and ditcher, and me mother does nothing but spin. But I'm a pretty young girl, the money comes slowly in. Oh dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what shall I do? For there's nobody coming to marry, and there's nobody coming to woo." And she gives another verse of that. This was given point by Luke's unmarried state. He sang it as a comic song, and his rendering certainly made it one. then you get someone called Old Algie, the mystery man, would be asked for a song, and he would sing in a cracked falsetto, which seemed to call for tinkling notes of a piano as accompaniment. "Have you ever been to the peninsula? If not, I advise you to stay where you are. For should you adore some Spanish senora, she might prove what some might call singular." So that's wonderful little snatches. Then there's snatches. And one of them is, "I wish 'twas all in vain, I wish I were a maid again." So this is familiar stuff. And then, "Now all young chaps take a warning by me, do not build your nest at the top of the tree." Yeah, this is the traditional repertory, and she's recalling it. And one recent settler made up his own verses, who had only lived at the hamlet about a quarter of a century. This is likewise. Had composed a snatch for himself to sing when he felt homesick for his own village. "Where be Deddington boys? Where be they now? They be at the Deddington at the plough. They bean't at home. This is the waggon and horses." So he's really... And then another old guy, they say let the old guys have a chance. And Master Price sings Lord Lovell again, which is absolute traditional stuff. But of course Lord Lovell was one of those songs that got the send-up version of Sam Cowell and people like that. You know, Will Duke does a lovely version of that he got, I think, from that wonderful Swindon singer, Lucky Luckhurst. You know.
Oh yes, I've heard Will sing that, called Joe Muggins.
Yeah, Joe Muggins
right,
is a version. But this is taken seriously. In this version, he says, "The old song saddened them, and partly because by that time the beer was getting low and 1/2 pint had to be made to last until closing time. But then some would say, what's old Master Tuffrey up to over in his corner there? Ain't heard him strike up tonight, and there would be cause for old David. It's Outlandish night." Not because they wanted particularly to hear it. Indeed, they had heard it so often they all knew it by heart. But because, as they said, "Poor old fella, be 83, let him sing while he can." And he launches into, so David would have his turn. He only knew one ballad, and that, he said, his grandfather had sung, and had said that he had heard his own grandfather sing it. Probably a long chain of grandfathers had sung it, but David was fated to be the last of them. It was out of date, even then, and only tolerated on account of its age. It ran, "An outlandish night, from the northlands a wooing came to me." So it's a standard version, pretty standard text, of course, but it doesn't have the parrot.
Oh, that's right.
But I wonder if that's her not wanting to make the song
just
too
condensing
long,
it
just
slightly.
condensing it. At last the song was piped out in the aged voice. Women at their cottage doors on summer's evenings would say, "They'll soon be out now. Poor old David's just singing this outlandish night." And then she sums it up. Songs and singers are all have gone, and in their places the wireless blares out variety and swing music, or informs the company in cultured tones of what is happening in China or Spain. Children no longer listen outside. There are very few who could listen for 30 or 40. For the 30 or 40 children, that is, which throve in those days have dwindled to about half a dozen, and these happily have books, wireless, and a good fire in their own homes. But to one of an older generation, it seems that a faint echo of those songs must still linger round the inn doorway. The singers were rude and untaught, and poor beyond modern imagining, but they deserved to be remembered, for they knew the now lost secret of being happy on little. Isn't that a great account? I mean,
That's fantastic.
I mean, this is, this is singing sessions I've been to, which are recreations, but I remember the singing sessions with the coppers at the Ram at Full and so on, and that's what
it's nice like. When folk songs turn up in literature like that. I mean, that's an account of a singing session sort of thing, but I know that what started me off in my folk songs in film kind of search and database was actually John Boden found he was listening to an audiobook of Thomas Hardy's The Return of the Native, read by Alan Rickman, and one of the characters in it does sing Queen Eleanor's Confession, and so Alan Rickman had to sing it for the audiobook, and so it started off a search for actors singing folk songs.
There's a whole
that became my database of.
There's a whole PhD which I've got downloaded on my old computer here that is about sort of folklore and folk song in Hardy. So it's a pretty useful document, actually. Nice piece of work.
And as part of my... Not that I'm searching for folk songs in film, because you can't really search for it. You just got to, as I'm doing, just watch a lot of films and hope that some folk songs turn up. But one of the most unexpected ones did turn up was this song. And it's in the 1935 film adaptation of David Copperfield, which is really fantastic. And it includes all-star cast. Which includes... W.C. Fields, I think, and Basil Rathbone, and all these people, and an actor called Hugh Williams, who is playing the character of James Steerforth, who woos young Emily, and then they go and get married, but then he leaves her. This is quite reminiscent of the song "The Outlandish Night" in a way. There's a bit of parallels, and kudos to whoever did some of the research for the making of the film, because I think it's I haven't actually read the book. I just know from films. I think it's there's a party where Steerforth and young Emily meet, I think. And in the film, the 1935 film, the character of Steerforth performs for the assembled gathering The Outlandish Night, sings 2 verses of it, and constantly giving young Emily the eye, sort of, listen to me with my lovely voice, and there's some reaction shots of her, and she is clearly really, really all in for this guy, wooing her with... But kudos to whoever picked The Outlandish Night as the song that Steerforth could sing, because that's... I was talking to Andy Turner about this. We had Andy on the podcast last season, and he said, it's a remarkably prescient song for the character of Steerforth to sing, because it kind of preludes or even predicts his actions in a way, to a certain extent of what that character does. So anyway, that film isn't massively available, but I do have a copy recorded off the television, and I filmed that bit of the song, and it's on YouTube. If you type in The Outlandish Night Matt Quinn, I think you'll find it. Outlandish Night David Copperfield or something. Hopefully you'll find my 30-second video clip of that scene from the film. And I was amazed that it turned up in a film and in that David Copperfield adaptation.
It's very interesting when writers are trying to create atmosphere. I mean, we looked at the Lark Rise, and you mentioned David Copperfield. Now, Hardy's the other one that quotes loads of songs. But of course, Hardy was really interesting because that's the culture he came from. He didn't stay in it in a way. He became this worldly intellectual. But I mean, he always harked back to that sort of society and that culture. I mean, to the extent that I saw a really interesting thing. He had a notebook. He went back, we're talking about the 1870s, 60s, 70s, and he went back to the newspapers of the 1820s, and he's picking out all the interesting stuff. And a lot of the stuff that gets detailed in Hardy, like the wife sales and so on, comes out of his research. Wow. Not just his own memory and his family, but also his actual active research of those old newspapers. Fascinating stuff. Well,
I haven't actually read Copperfield. It's a gap in my book knowledge. But I wonder if there's a song sung at a party like that in the book, and whether that's a folk song, where did Dickens go to with his research? I don't know, but so I'd be interested to read it at some point. Anyway, we've kind of steered away from this stuff with Steerforth, but because that was the Outlandish Night. So should we move on to some recommendations? The usual field recordings recommendations. We've both managed to come up with quite a few, but I'll stick to 5 at least.
Well, the one person I absolutely associated with, because I heard it early on, was Fred Jordan. Of course, he was quite a celebrated character in the
Shropshire guy, isn't he?
Shropshire guy, and he used to sing it in a very serious way, but it had this wonderful vibrato sort of voice, don't prattle, my pretty Polly. It's wonderful. I mean, he's really worth listening to, and that was the classic. To me, that's the classic Outlandish Night. But there's others. Jumbo Brightwell, the East Anglia singer, did a lovely up-tempo version, as did Ursula Ridley in a rather posh voice, but she really into the song on some of those Brian Matthews recordings done in Sussex in the 50s. Really quite... a lot of the singers, I think, because it's an exciting song, they often take it quite fast. I mean, there's an American recording from the Warner collection, Lena Bourne Fish, very spirited performance of it.
Lena Bourne Fish is the one called Castle by the Sea.
Yes,
isn't it,
yes,
as well?
that's right. Yeah, that's the other one. But in contrast, there's a few good Scots recordings of it.
You mentioned one in the Kist to Riches.
And the Kist to Riches website, a man called Watty Wright, who I didn't know before I sort of started looking for it. And this is a lovely measured version of May Colvin, which is the name it goes under in Scotland sometimes. So really quite interesting. But I think there's loads of others. We both talked about... there's a song in Northern Ireland, Force Lover John, which was sung
by Kevin Mitchell.
Kevin Mitchell, sadly departed friend. Was a wonderful singer in the traditional style. And I absolutely love that version, the Force Lover John. But there's lots of others, I think. You've got somewhere.
Yes, well, there's certainly May Bradley, who was a fantastic singer from sort of the Welsh border, Shropshire area. And there's an album of hers or recordings of her called Sweet Swansea. And I'm just trying to find that in my list. May Bradley, and that one's called The Outlandish Night, and that's rather great. I love, we have this occasionally, we definitely had this on the Two Sisters episode back in season 1, where you find a recording of someone singing it, and you know for a fact, because they've told you, or they've said they learned it from so-and-so, and then we find we do have a recording of that person singing it. Yeah. So you get 2 recordings of the same song from the sources. And we've got Vic Legg from down in Cornwall, fantastic singer, lovely guy. Still going, comes to Sheffield occasionally for the carols, and has his own, he's one of the residents at Bodmin Folk Club down there and everything. And his version was from his The Next Generation Back, because there's a CD from Veteran Records of was it Charlotte Renals and the CD's called Catch Me If You Can, and the 3 singers on it. Sophie Legg, which I think was Vic's mother, Vic and his sister Viv, and their mother Sophie Legg, plus Betsy Reynolds and Charlotte Reynolds. I think they must all be 3 sisters.
3 sisters, I think, They're made by Pete Coe, those recordings. Really nice.
And they're out on a Veteran release.
Fabulous.
And so there's a recording of Charlotte Reynolds, so Vic's aunt, singing the exact same song. Although I think Vic called it Outlandish Night, but I think Charlotte Reynolds referred to it as A Man from the North. But it's the same version, because that's where Vic learnt it from. And we've got both recordings, and that's fantastic. If I can, I'll always mention Mary Ann Haynes.
She lived 2 streets away from me in Brighton, and I never knew her.
That's amazing.
Mike Yates found her, and shame really.
It's a flower seller, wasn't she? A flower girl.
Gypsy background.
That's right, and
great singer. Her performance of a song called "The Colour of Amber." Just if I had a Desert Island Disc, that would be one of them.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. Really wonderful, and it's a bit more leaning towards that kind of crooner element you were talking about. It's very croonery. And that she had a version which was referred to as the young officer. So rather than a knight or someone from the Outland or Northland, this is a young officer. Come to. So there's some kind of military sort of link there, I guess. And one of my favourite finds in my parents' LP collection that I'm gradually digitising was an LP of a Canadian singer called LaRena Clark, who I have mentioned before on the podcast. There's a Topic LP from 1965, I think, called A Canadian Garland, and it's British ballads and songs from Southern Ontario.
Right.
And because LaRena Clark was from Southern Ontario, and she had this repertoire of British songs and ballads. And The Dapple Grey it was called, but it's the Outlandish Night, clearly. And I won't mention any others, but I will say that I'm not sure I've got recording of it, but I'm pretty sure that Gordon Hall had a version of the Outlandish Night. I always mention Gordon Hall because I'm obsessed.
I don't think I ever heard him sing it, but he had a big repertory. I wouldn't have heard everything, and I knew Gordon quite well before I left Sussex in the early 90s. I mean, he was a regular. Yes, I mean, he passed away about 3 years maybe before I became interested in folk music properly. Wonderful presence. Yes, I've heard recordings. Chain smoked all the way through. Long songs.
I know. If I sing one of his in a session now, or in Sussex at least, at the Lewis Saturday Folk Club, they will say, is this a 3-faggot or a 5-faggot song? How many fags will it take Gordon to get through while he sings it? Anyway, we won't digress into Gordon Hall, but I'm pretty sure Gordon had a version of it as well. But yeah, that's a good selection of recordings. Some American, Canadian, one potentially Welsh, I think, with May Bradley, or at least she was Welsh. Scotland, Ireland, England. Right, well... then with your guess, you've got a West Indian one as well. And indeed so, there we go. We'll come to that later on. And I will put links to those. I'll play some clips of some of those in the mid-episode break as usual, and I'll put links to as many as I can find in the show notes. But I think we'll wrap it up there. And sad to say, but I think this is just because of what songs are coming up in the next 10 Roud numbers. I think this is your first and last appearance in this current season. Right, okay. But, well, there's plenty of stuff to do. But we've got you on Patreon for a couple more things around this time. Maybe even tomorrow, I think. When this episode goes out, I think tomorrow you're on for an episode on Patreon. So we'll... right. So we definitely... It's been a Vic Gammon sort of heavy 2 or 3 weeks. But then we won't hear from you for another 2 or 3 months. So fine. It's been great while it lasted. But I know for certain that you're doing the history of at least one song in season 4 coming up in the summer. So we'll come to that. The Broomfield Hill. All right. That's an interesting one. If we come to that listeners will hear that in mid-June. I obviously get attracted to these songs where the women outwit the rather nasty men. You know. Indeed. Well, when I did a session at Pinewoods once. I forget exactly what I called it. Was that over in America? Over in America, and I called it Resourceful Women and Useless Men or something. Okay, yeah. Excellent. Well, definitely that one. Hopefully 1 or 2 more. We'll see what the songs are later on. But this is your only appearance in season 3. So, as usual, thank you so much for your time and effort and everything. And we'll see you again sometime. So, Vic Gammon, thank you very much. And lovely to do it live as well. Nice to see you, Matt. You too. Thanks very much, Vic. A huge thanks to Vic Gammon for providing us with the history of the Outlandish Night. As ever, at this, the halfway point in the episode, we're going to listen to a few different versions of the song sung by traditional singers. So what you're going to hear now is versions of The Outlandish Night from Carlotte Renals and then her nephew Vic Legg, and then also Sarah Porter, Gordon Hall and May Bradley. And then The Dapple Grey from LaRena Clark, Castle by the Sea from Lena Bourne Fish, and The Young Officer from Mary Ann Haynes.
There was a man come from the Northland. He came here one day unto me. He said he would would take me back to the Northland, and that's where he would marry me, marry me. That's where he would marry me. You get me some of your mother's food and some of your father's gold, and take me tonight to your father's stable, where nags do stand 33.
There was a young man came from the Northlands, he came here one day unto me. He said that he'd take me back to the Northlands, and that's where he would marry me, marry me. And that's where he would marry me. You get me some of your mother's food and some of your father's gold. You take me tonight to your father's stable, where nags to stand 33.
Go and get me some of your mother's money and some of your father's gold, and 2 of the best nags from the stable, what they do stand 33. He mounted on the chestnut bay, and she on the lily white grey. They rid till they came to the deep riverside, 3 hours before it was day.
An outlandish knight came from the Northland, and he came a-courting of O'Shea, and he pledged he would take her unto the Northland, and there they would married be. Go get me some of your father's gold, some of your mother's dowry, and 2 fine steeds from your father's stable, where there stands 33.
Now also Turkey came from the Northland. When he came alluded to me. Now he told me he'd take me unto the Northlands, and there would marry me. You fetch me some of your father's gold and some of your mother's feed, 2 of the best horses out of the stable, where there stands 33.
The wind it blew all from the north way, when he came wooing me. He said he would take me way to the north way, and there he'd marry me. Bring me some of your father's gold, and some of your mother's fee, 2 of the best horses from the stable, where there stands 33.
The castle by the sea, arise, oh arise, my lady fair, for you my bride shall be, and we will dwell in a sylvan bower in my castle by the sea, and bring along your marriage fee, which you can claim today, and also take your swiftest steeds, the milk white and the grey. The lady mounted her white steed, he rode the turban grey. They took the path of the wild seashore, or so I've heard them say.
There was a young officer from the North Camp, and he ran into plight on me, and he swore he would take me down by the seaside. He said, "At night I'll make you my bride. Go and get me some of your father's gold and some of your mother's money, and 2 of the very best horses he got at 50 to 40 to 3.
And you can find the links to all those tracks and the albums they're from in the show notes. On to the second half. I spoke with singer, melodeon player and concertina player Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne, and we chatted about his history with folk music and his current project, which led to his version of the Outlandish Night. Well, hello, Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne.
Well, hello, Matt Quinn.
Hi, it's nice to see you. How are you? How's things?
I'm absolutely wonderful, and I'm so happy to be here as well.
Oh, yeah.
Long-time listener, first-time guest.
Indeed so. Well, it's great to have you, and so glad you've been listening so far, and hopefully enjoying it. But I suppose if you weren't enjoying it, you might not have come on in the first place.
Ask me at the end.
Ask me. Yeah, great to have you on. I can tell by your attire that from on the Zoom call that it is cold where you are. It is cold here also. It's currently very 50-mile-an-hour winds outside my window, which is not pleasant. So, as listeners already know, because this is the second half of the episode, we've been discussing Roud 21, which is the Outlandish Night, or sometimes I think the child ballad was Lady Isabel and the Elf, or the Elf Knight, the Elfin Knight. Before we get on to the song, give us a bit of your history and your background and your sort of musical upbringing, history of folk music. How did you come to folk music? All that sort of thing.
Yeah, so my musical beginnings were, the thing is, neither of my parents are folkies, or they certainly weren't when I was young. They've both kind of gotten into it a bit now, but they certainly weren't. I didn't grow up in a folk household, but they both had very, very eclectic music taste, and I suppose that sort of gave me a bit of musical. What's the best way to describe it? I suppose it kind of gave me that broader outlook of music, that there's so much music out there. There's so much music that is exciting to explore. It kind of instilled that spirit into me. And my first instrument was the violin at school, which I started when I was about 6. And I was just having conventional classical lessons on the violin. But through that, as well as the sort of standard classical repertoire, I was learning a little bit of folk music, just like mostly Scottish folk music initially, sort of Scottish fiddle tunes. And I just kind of found I was enjoying that more than doing the classical violin repertoire. And so that just kind of inspired me to investigate the folk repertoire a bit further. And initially that was sort of Scottish and Irish fiddle tunes. And then I discovered that there is an English repertoire as well, and that was exciting to play and to explore. And then I discovered that there were folk events as well. I started going along to. I did my first ever gig in a folk club when I was 11. I played. What did I think I played Greensleeves. I think I played Danny Boy. I can't remember what else I played. I played Egan's Polka. That was on the set list, which I'm sure is a tune you know very well.
Indeed, so yes, very much.
Yeah. So I started going along to folk gigs when folk events, sessions, and folk clubs and sing-arounds and the like. When I was really quite young. But yeah, that was my own discovery. It was very much I was dragging my parents along to those rather than the other way around.
And they were thinking, where did we go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was that. And then I'd from going to those folk gigs and also starting to go along to folk festivals as well. That was where I started bumping into people playing concertinas and melodeons. And I was pretty much hooked almost instantly. I was fascinated by not only the sounds but the mechanics and the sort of the appearance of the instruments. And I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a concertina player and a melodeon player more than a violin player. So I got my first concertina when I was 12, and then a melodeon a year after that when I was 13. And I just became hooked pretty much instantly, and the violin carried alongside for a year or two, but by the time I was sort of 15, that had dropped, that had fallen by the wayside, and I was just a squeeze box player from then on.
Wow, yeah. That's certainly. Yes, I remember seeing you long time before we ever met. I think I think I'd come across, because it was round about that time of sort of 14, 15. Was that when the band started with Granny's Attic with George and Lewis?
Yeah, so Granny's was so we all went to the same secondary school in Worcester, and they were in the year above me at school, and we knew each other from right at the start of school. In fact, a little bit of Granny's Attic history that I don't think I've ever spoken about this, but you've pulled it out of me. Lewis played at my high school induction day, so the sort of the taster day that I went to for the high school when I was still in year 6 at primary school, and he played a fiddle tune on that day. But the school teacher announced him. They said, we're going to have a traditional Hungarian folk tune played by Alex. So I thought, when I get to school, I've got to track down this Alex guy. He seems really cool. He plays folk music on the fiddle. So I spent a couple of weeks going, where's Alex? Where's Alex on the fiddle? And then me and Lewis had the same violin teacher at secondary school. And when she found out that I was into folk music, she said, well, one of my other students, Lewis, is really into folk music, and he plays folk tunes by ear. And I thought, oh, great, maybe Lewis can introduce me to Alex then.
Fantastic. Well, maybe his name is Alex. Maybe everyone's been getting it wrong all these years, and he hasn't. He's just too shy to sort of correct anyone.
Yeah. But yeah, I got to know them because. Yeah, I was playing the violin when I started secondary school. That was before the squeeze boxes had come along. And me and Lewis, as I say, we had the same violin teacher, and we were in the string ensemble together. And then George, obviously, is best known as a guitarist now, but his instrument at school was the euphonium, and we were all in the school orchestra together. So we knew each other right from the start of when I was in year 7 and they were in year 8, right from the start of high school. And then me and Lewis did a little bit of fiddle tunes together pretty early on at school. And George and Lewis were quite close to each other because they were in the same year and they did a bit of music together. They were in, I don't know if George has ever told you about these sorts of things, but they won a school Battle of the Bands contest playing, I think it was Hey Ya. It was definitely a song by Outkast. But they...
Oh, wonderful! I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, they did loads of. They were in loads of like school bands, and in fact, we were also in a school band together. We were in a school ukulele band that was a quartet with one of our other friends. So Granny's Attic started off. Initially, I think we thought it was just going to be another school band that lasted for about 4 weeks, and that was that.
Here we are 16 years later.
Yeah, it was. I was in year 9 and they were in year 10, and we just kind of got chatting and we realised we were all really starting to get interested in folk music. And that summer was the summer I'd taken up the melodeon.
Okay.
So we thought it'd be a good idea to have a go at playing some folk tunes together. And it initially just started off as something to do in lunch times, and we played school assemblies and things like that. And then just gradually we started getting very low-key public gig offers, for the first 5 years of our career. So we started, I was 13, they were 14, and this was 2009. For the first 5 years of us being a band, 90-odd% of our gigs were within a 30-mile radius of Worcester. They were right. Pub gigs and church fetes and functions and things of that nature. We didn't really do any gigs on the folk circuit as such, aside from the very odd small slot at a local folk festival like Bromyard Folk Festival we played a fringe gig at. So we've been going for 15 and a bit years now, but
wow.
I
remember seeing, I don't think I ever saw you guys as the trio sort of. So obviously not when you were started that first 5 years, because you didn't I wasn't from Worcestershire either, so but certainly, I think I'd seen some YouTube videos maybe of something. I remember thinking, people younger than me. That's a strange feeling. Because every when you're a young person, as some people still refer to me sometimes, you're the youngest person. Normally in the sort of folk circuits, you're the youngest person you know, and you're the token young person at a club and whatever, and you get sort of heralded as the next young thing, and then you become 20 or something, and there are people who are 15, 16 doing it. And you think, okay, that's a bit weird feeling. So I remember sort of being aware of you guys around then, and then I wouldn't be able to know what year it was, but Sidmouth Folk Festival. This is a long time before you and I actually met, because I remember exactly when we met. But I did see you at Sidmouth Folk Week at the rugby club in one of those evening sessions that was run by Faustus.
Right, that was.
And you were sitting in the front row with a Hona poker work.
Yeah. That was either 2010 or 2011.
Because I was sitting about 2 rows behind you.
There you go. I did not know that.
No, I'd forgotten that just now. But I remember that, and then I remember thinking, oh, he's really good, isn't he? And then sort of being mildly miffed that someone was better than me in that kind of youthful way that I think, I'm awesome, I'm really great. I think someone turns up who's clearly better than me, and you go, oh damn. Anyway, it's fine. It's all good. Yeah. And that was it, I think. And then I was still aware of you and the trio. And then my band, the Dovetail Trio, played at the Folk at the Grove in Leeds.
Yep.
And you were at university there, and you turned up and did a floor spot.
I did.
And I remember seeing you walk in and thinking, that looks like a very taller version of that kid from like 7 years ago. Yeah. And it turns out he was. And then you I remember you got up to do a floor spot with the concertina and did Tom the Barber.
I did, yeah. Yes.
That's right. I remember that. And then we sort of instantly I think glided toward each other after the gig finished.
Yeah.
Said, it's you, and you went, it's you. And,
it was
the rest is history.
that was like October 2015.
That sounds right.
Year.
Yeah.
2 little tidbits about that gig. I was doing a modular university.
About to critique my concertina playing. No.
You're not far off, We had to. The module was aesthetics, where essentially we were studying the different philosophical views of music, and we had to write. We had to study what different philosophers had said about music, and then we had to write a gig review from the perspective of that philosopher.
Oh dear!
So I was making I don't know if you noticed, but I had my notebook there, and I was making copious notes about that gig. And
I didn't notice that. No,
I can't remember which philosopher I wrote the gig review from, but I wrote a philosophical gig review of that Dovetail Trio gig, which might be somewhere on an old laptop.
Right. Well, best left forgotten, I think. Maybe. Although it'd probably be better written than some reviews we had of albums. I know in private quarters, you and I have shared some gig reviews, some album reviews, and you get some weird stuff, some weird people writing. But we're all weird on the folk scene.
Yeah,
just some of us stand out. But yes, and that's when I met you. So that was 2017. So yeah, we're 8 years. And then
2015,
it's just been
10 years.
15, sorry.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. And then I think I then saw you at a folk festival probably with George and Lewis, and that's how I met George. And I a long time later, George and I got together for a duo as well. So it's so in terms of your concertina and melodeon playing, I remember back then at Sidmouth I saw you were playing a Hona Pokerwork, the king of all melodeons.
Yeah.
Not that I play one anymore either, but they are brilliant beasts. But those two things have been your focus, really, haven't they? As well as the singing, obviously. That's been your thing.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, I when I was young, as I said, my first instrument was a violin, and then I also went through a period of just trying out loads and loads of different instruments. So I was like a guitarist for a while, and I played mandolin for a bit, and I had to go on things like piano and bass guitar, and I was kind of a bit of a musical hopper. But yeah, once the Melodians and concertinas came along, everything else kind of went in the cupboard, and that's been my main focus for the past 15 plus years.
Amazing. And you've got the solo work, which I'm sure we're going to come to later on, and the work with Granny's Attic, and there's various other projects you're involved in, aren't you? What are they?
Yeah. So what have we got? I'm involved in with Reg Muros. I'm involved in his song cycle Stolen from God, which is a cycle of songs that he's written tracing the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and I'm playing concertina on that. And our colleague Sunto Suso plays the kora, the West African harp. So there's that, which has been going for the past sort of 2 years. And I play with Angeline Morrison as well as part of her Sorrow Songs band 4-piece lineup. And I'm also involved in a children's theatre show, which is called Tales from the Lighthouse, which I absolutely love, and it's crazy and it's completely different to everything else, but it's wonderful. So that's been going for the past 6 months, and hopefully we'll be going for a good while yet. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It keeps you. Normally, when people are busy, people will say it keeps you off the streets, but this sort of thing keeps you on the streets anyway, because we're always travelling and on the road.
Yeah.
Keeps you on the streets. So then, the Outlandish Night, Roud 21. Do you have a memory of, like, not necessarily the version you sing now for the album it's on, but do you have are you able to pinpoint a moment when this song sort of turned up in your consciousness, as it were, when you were first aware of this song as a thing, rather than as something you might perform yourself, but just where did you first hear this song?
Yeah. So don't know. I can pinpoint the exact time I first heard it, but I can definitely pinpoint the performers. So my as I say, I started off on the folk scene, exploring it from a sort of a participatory level, going along to folk clubs and sessions and things like that, but didn't have much consciousness of the folk scene from a performance perspective. I didn't really know many of the acts on the English folk circuit, as it were. But I would have been about 13, and I used to walk past the main venue in Worcester is called Huntington Hall, and I used to walk past it quite regularly on the way home from school. And this was just after I'd taken up the concertina, and I saw that there was a poster outside the venue with a man with a concertina and then a second guy with a fiddle, who turned out to be Spiers and Boden. And I thought, that instrument looks like my instrument. I'm going to ask my dad if he'll take me to that gig, and he did. We managed to get like the last 2 tickets because it was like 2 days before the gig, and that was one of those, to use a overused phrase, it was a life-changing gig. It was incredible. I mean, you've heard Spiers and Boden, you know that they're pretty good.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw them quite a lot around that period as well. They came and did our folk club in Lewis, and yes, it was always amazing.
Yeah, so that would have been 2009, and I don't think they did the Outlandish Night that evening. That was 2009, so they'd just released the Vagabond album, so it was a lot of that material.
That's right. Vagabond was their 5th album, I think.
Yeah,
Outlandish Night's on their 2nd.
It's on the 2nd, yeah.
On that album, so yeah, that's quite a way after. But I think they still do bring it out occasionally for
I know I have heard them do it live, but I don't think it was on the set list that night. But basically after that gig, I became completely obsessed with them and their music. So within the next sort of 6 months, I got hold of all of their albums. So if I hadn't heard them do it live, I definitely would have heard it on Bellow, which is the album that it's on, the 2nd album. And then, I became obsessed with them and by extension, Bellowhead, who of course did the big band arrangement of it. And then by extension, all the composite bits of Bellowhead as well, the sort of the offshoot performers, some of whom I think have done versions of it.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, I mean that's a really good version of Outlandish Night. I mentioned that a few times with Vic. Yeah, it's a good full version with the parrot as well.
Exactly.
your version then, this is, understandably, I'd never heard this version before.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is on your most recent album. Start us off with a bit about the album and the project that this album is on.
The album is called Play Up the Music, English Folk Songs in the Caribbean and Black America. So it explores this idea of that shared tradition of folk songs that started life in England. They're sort of classic English folk songs and ballads, but then made their way across the Atlantic and were taken up by black singers in the Americas. And to a greater or lesser extent, it's the album came out last year. It came out at the end of 2024. But it's kind of the culmination of a lot of things that I've been thinking about for pretty much since I started getting interested in folk music. So that's nearly 20 years. So my mom's family are from the Caribbean. They're from Barbados. That's where our parents came from. And so by extension, she's always had a massive interest in all sorts of black musics of the Americas, Caribbean music and a lot of the black American music, the gospel music and the blues music and things of that ilk. So I've sort of inherited quite a bit of that interest from her. And I've always been vaguely aware that there was this shared body of songs, this body of black versions of English folk songs. And there had been a little bit of performing of that on the English folk scene as well. Like Waterson and Carthy did a song called, I think it was called The Bright Shiny Morning. Yeah, which Norma sings that song and she does an amazing performance on it. And Norma lived out in the West Indies for a few years. And she got that version from an album of Caribbean folk songs. I think it's Roud too. I think the young sailor cut down in his prime, but
that's right. Season 1, episode 2.
Exactly. Listeners are directed back to that for a fantastic episode. So Norma and Waterson Carthy did that Caribbean version of an English folk song, and Brian Peters as well when he did his project with Jeff Davies, looking at Cecil Sharp's folk song collecting in America. He sang one of just a handful of songs that Cecil Sharp collected from a black American singer, a version of Barbara Allen. So I knew that there were these handful of songs out there that had come to light on the English folk scene. And I was just really interested to spend a bit of time seeing how much more evidence there was of that repertoire existing. It was a little bit tricky to start with, to find the sources, but one of those things, once I got rolling, you realised how deep that seam actually is. There's loads of really, really interesting repertoire out there that's just pretty much completely untouched.
And so then the version of this song that's on the album, tell us about that.
So this is actually one of the American ones, and it was collected by a woman by the name of Dorothy Scarborough, who was quite an authority in a lot of ways in the field of African American folklore, and she was sort of white American, European American, and she was actually both of her. So she was doing field work in the early 20th century, and both of her sets of grandparents were actually plantation owners. They were slave owners.
Right.
And so, when slavery ended in America, it was quite common that the formerly enslaved people would still stay within the employment of the people that had owned them. They were just paid. So she grew up essentially on plantations surrounded by black American people who were singing these old songs. So she was, even though she came from outside the culture, she was quite familiar with the black American musical cultures. So she did quite a bit of field work, looking at those African American traditions. And she published a book in the 1920s called, and excuse my historical language, called "On the Trail of Negro Folk Songs," which is it's an incredible bit of field work. So it came out in 1925, and it's divided down into each chapter explores a different category of African American folk song, and then the second chapter is titled "The Negro's Part in Transmitting the Traditional Songs and Ballads." So it's essentially all about Black American versions of English folk songs and their place within that culture and that musical tradition. And The Outlandish Night was one of the songs that's included in that portion of the book, one of the songs that she collected. And it says here that she found it from a woman. So this was during some of her field work trips. She found it from a woman in Waco in Texas, who was Dorothy Scarborough kind of came across her by chance just while she was exploring the area, and the woman was singing she was singing a song, and Dorothy Scarborough couldn't. She kind of overheard it. She couldn't tell what it was. She was singing a song. She was singing something to a young child that happened to be the woman's great grandson. And so she kind of scuttled up to her, and said, "What's that song you were singing?" And she said, "Oh, that's nothing. That's just a silly little thing. It's not really a song, and I'm not really much of a singer. It's just, a silly thing. I don't even know what it is. I don't even think it has a title. It's just something that my grandparents used to sing to me, and I carry on singing it to my great-grandchild." And so, that sort of classic folk song collector persuasion happened, a little bit of toing and throwing, and then the woman eventually was persuaded to sing the full song, which turned out to be The Outlandish Night, which is just a silly little song that doesn't really have a title.
Yeah, this old thing. I just sang it out loud. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
it's sometimes weird. Well, it sometimes can be quite not shocking, but odd when you hear people say, "Oh, I sung this song to so and so as a lullaby," and you think, "Well, that's really awful subject matter."
Yeah.
But actually, kids, especially babies, they're not going to understand the content of the song. They just need to hear the sound of that person's voice. And I know that, John Boden and Faye Hill used to sing Tam Lin, I think, to get the kids to sleep. Only took one time around the song though, rather than So the longer the song, you only have to do it once. And I guess Outlandish Night's quite long.
It is.
I don't know. Yeah, it's because it's a lengthy song. How off the top of your head, how many verses yours is?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. 20, something like that, maybe.
Something
in that region. Yeah,
it's a lengthy old thing.
Yeah.
And does it? Does that version that you've got? Is that pretty much the same kind of plot as what we know of over here in terms of story beats and things, or does it vary a bit?
So the song as it's printed in the book was actually a really full set of verses. There were a couple of gaps, and I did a little bit of light editing to plug those gaps out. But the narrative was incredibly complete and has, as you say, the same beats as the standard versions that are sung over here. One of the things that really drew me to this particular version, not only because it sort of fitted the theme that I was researching at the time, but I was really, really drawn to the melody. I think the tune is incredible, just the way it flows. But the set of verses, the middle scene, if you like, where the woman is being dragged into the water, this particular version, it really extends that scene in a way that a lot of the English versions don't. There's like 5 verses in that middle bit, and I think it really hits the tension just having that extended passage in the middle. I was really drawn to that.
So what's the extension then? How is that extended? Because in relation to what normally happens.
So most of the English version that I'm familiar with, it's just there is a verse where she goes into the water, and then in the next verse she gets her comeuppance. Whereas in this one, it's I'll kind of roll you out some of the verses. It's he took my hand and dragged me down into the ocean so deep. I said, "Oh, sweetheart, carry me back. The water's up to my feet." And then he pulled my hand and dragged me on, crying, "Sweetheart, sweetheart, we soon will be across it now. We've reached the deepest part." And then it kind of continues round in that format, but she complains that the water's essentially getting higher. So the water's up to my waist, the water's up to my knees. So you get that sort of incremental repetition where, she's being dragged deeper and deeper into the water, and she's becoming more and more sort of frantic and realizing that something horrifying is potentially about to happen.
And is he on horseback still at this moment? Is he...
Yes, yeah.
Because there's somewhere. Because Vic was saying that it's it's quite odd sometimes that he's still on horseback sometimes at this moment. On other versions, he's not. I think so. That's great. Yeah, and then she goes home. And do we get the parrot in that version as well in yours?
Kind of, yeah. Well, it's not, and this is one of the other things I quite liked about it is that with knowing the English versions, we know that it is a parrot. But if you looked at this song in isolation, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's a parrot. It's Polly sitting up in the window high. So without context, Polly could be, the sister or
the younger sister or something,
something like that. Yeah, just another character. So yeah, Polly's in the song. Yeah,
right. And do we know the name of our female protagonist, heroine? Is she Polly or Isabel?
No, we've not got an. Well, in the book, Dorothy Scarborough calls the song "Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight," but that's just because she's using child's title.
Right. Okay.
The name doesn't crop up anywhere in the song itself.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's quite amazing how there are some songs that we covered, over the podcast so far that have developed considerably from its earliest version, and I'm not sure there's any that have are completely different now. But things like the Demon Lover we had last season, where what we now know of as the Demon Lover is kind of the second half of the song. Essentially, there was a whole preamble, lengthy preamble in one of the earliest broadsides and things, whereas the Outlandish Night, essentially, it's just that, and it's always been that. Even as far away as Texas, it's still that as well. And so you're on the album. This is you accompanied, obviously, by yourself, but on the concertina, Anglo concertina.
It is. Yeah.
And I played a bit of that to Vic Gammon. He was very impressed, but he's also an Anglo concertina player.
Yeah.
He's very keen on playing counter melodies and things that aren't just the melody underneath.
Yeah.
Which, unfortunately, is one of my things I do quite a lot. But I don't practice as much as other people. I'm too busy doing a podcast. I haven't got time to practice the concertina.
Yeah, it's overrated. But yeah, I mean the arrangement of this song. So, as I say, the album came out in 24, and kind of the idea had been bubbling away for a while. But I really kicked into the research for the album in around 2020, and this was one of the first songs that I found that I knew I wanted to include. Probably late 2020, maybe early 2021. But it took me so long to work this one up. It took me probably the longest I've ever spent on a song, actually. It took me about 2 years.
Wow.
Just really kicking it around in different forms. So, in fact, one of the first things was getting the key and the register right. It's incredibly musical nerdery, but I was doing it in G for a while on my main concertina, which is CG, and that wasn't really fitting right. And then I tried it in a few other keys on that concertina, and it kind of wasn't fitting right. And then that summer, I bought a new concertina in a different tuning in A, which is sort of in Anglo concertina terms that puts it in the tenor register, that concertina being tuned in A meant that it was quite nice to play in the key of E, this song, and that then just completely opened the song up, sort of settling in that key and that register and on that concertina. So that took about 6 months finding the right key and register for it. And then, I mean, it's like you say, it's a long song. There's a lot of verses in there, and they come quite quickly. And the tune as well, as I say, the tune really excited me, but it's quite a tricky tune. It's that whole thing that Martin Carthy kind of talks about songs in one. It's quite an irregular tune.
It's a time signature of one. You almost can't count it in, can you?
Yeah.
Is that melody, is that an exact replication of what was collected, or have you sort of amended it slightly in any way?
So yeah, I mean, the tune, as it's notated in 2/4, but it's notated in a really weird way where a lot of the tune crosses the bar lines and is tied. So I kind of started with that melody, but around that time I was also doing a lot of music transcription work for a book that came out a couple of years ago called A Secret Stream, and I was spending a lot of time transcribing traditional. So that book focuses on songs that were collected from Romany, Gypsy, and Traveller singers and musicians. And I was spending a lot of time listening to those field recordings, and I was really interested in the way that a lot of the singers on there were using melodic variation, and sometimes they would have like two quite distinct tunes within the same song. Like they'd start off the first verse with one tune, and then the remainder of the song would be sung to a completely different tune, or which is, I just really love that. Or they'd have sort of more subtle variations where, you know, you'd have a different melodic flourish within the middle of the verse. And I was really interested in that, and I kind of wanted to capture a bit of that spirit in this song. So it probably comes across better on the album version of this, where I'm kind of picking out those tunes with the concertina as well. But yeah, I wanted to get quite a bit of melodic variation within this song, kind of to help with that sense of narrative as well, that sense of storytelling.
Yeah, and so I've found through my work with folk songs and this sort of thing is that, yeah, sometimes the melodic variations kind of turn up naturally due to the way the words scan, depending on, sometimes you get a line that has 3 extra syllables, so you just have to, I mean, you could try and cut it down and even it out, but it's much more interesting to keep the words as they would scan in its full form, and then twist the melody and the time signature in that bit
exactly
to fit that. I do that. There's a song I do with George, Sheffield Park, where we did that slightly as well, and it makes it much more interesting and less sort of uniform in that way. I like it.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was one of the things that came up when I was doing this this song, and one of the reasons why it took so long to work up is that some of the verses are very uneven, very sort of inconsistent in the number of syllables that they offer from verse to verse. So yeah, there was quite a bit of consideration as to how to slot those in and how to make up those extra 2 bars of melody or whatever that was required in a way that didn't feel disjointed with the rest of the tune.
And then listening to your version, it caught me off guard with the end, the way the melody ends on each verse with that repeated line. Is that repeated line part of the original collected version?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
because that caught me off guard, because obviously the last line is the words, but that melody, ba ba da 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 da, and then you expect, if it does a repeat or the refrain, you expect it to be that again, the full line, but it doesn't. It stops halfway through.
Yeah,
and then it ends on the note, the 5th note of the scale, which can then either be played as a chord 1 or a chord 5. But that caught me off guard the first time I heard it. In a good way. In a good way. Yeah. I'm not gonna tip the table over with disgust at that. But he didn't end on the 1. But it's it's. I love how, well, folk songs in general, but melodies of folk songs and whatever can just be so. Everything can be so different and so sort of. There's no rule with any of this stuff. Anything can yeah, you can do whatever you want with it, and anything can happen in any way, and it makes for a much more interesting musicscape, if such a word exists.
Absolutely.
You know, great. And so that album is available to buy, I assume.
It is in all the usual places. It's on. You can get it via my website and the Granny's Attic website, and on Bandcamp and the usual downloading platforms as well. It's on all the usual places.
Anything else you want to mention or talk about before we come on to the recommendations section?
Don't think there is.
Okay. Recommendations. Yeah, so as usual, with these episodes in the first half with the history guests, we recommend some field recordings, and in the singer half, we recommend some revival recordings. What have you got for us, Cohen?
So I would start off with
We've already mentioned them.
We've already mentioned it, exactly, the recording that got me hooked on this song, which is the Spiers Boden version, and then by extension the Bellowhead version, which is the same version, but expanded in that big band arrangement, which is on the Burlesque album, the first full Bellowhead album, which is it's an incredible arrangement, as is the Spiers Boden one. That's I think that's one of the things that Spiers Boden I think did really well, was that that duo big band sound, and this is I think it's one of their best duo arrangements. It's got that real sense of, and it's partly because of the song, that real sense of sort of storytelling and cinematic excitement, the way they get those loads of different textures out of just those two instruments and the sort of the interplay. So that highly recommended. That's on the Bellow album.
That's right, Bellow, that's 2003, and then Burlesque with Bellowhead is 2006. Yeah, I always impressed by particularly. Oh no, not any shade towards Boden, but particularly John Spiers on with his melodeon playing, because I remember him talking to me about this, and he's saying that he basically, for a long time, doesn't treat the bass end as like part of the melodeon. He treats the chord buttons. You pretend the chord buttons are the guitar, and the bass notes as the bass guitar, and pretend they are separate instruments played by separate people. And there's a lot of that in the Outlandish Night of little bass runs and chord work, and then there's the right hand stuff as well. And yeah, it's that's certainly one of the defining factors of Spiers and Boden repertoire is the amount of it doesn't sound like two people; it sounds like three or four people.
Yeah,
and that's partly due to the fact that obviously Boden can fiddle sing really well.
Yeah,
but also I think a key factor in that is John Spiers' left hand. And so yes, always amazing stuff. Spiers and Boden and Bellowhead.
Yeah.
Who else?
Absolutely, and as by extension of that, I mean the kind of the way I got interested in folk music and listening was through Spiers and Boden, and then doing that sort of music geekery thing of reading the sleeve notes and seeing who they were learning their songs from and who had inspired them. And so that, eventually led me to all sorts of other amazing performers, Martin Carthy, Nic Jones, Peter Bellamy, Pete and Chris Coe, all these people that were cited in the sleeve notes of Spiers and Boden and Bellowhead and the various offshoots. And so that Outlandish Night song was probably one of the first things that led me towards Martin Carthy, and they credited Martin Carthy as their source for this song. And Martin Carthy recorded an amazing version of this song as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's on the album Shearwater from 1972, which is his first album. Not that anyone cares. It's the first album he made solo after he left Steel Ice Band for the first time.
Well, there you go.
So, but Martin Carthy. I mean, has there ever been a bad Martin Carthy arrangement of a song?
I don't think there has. No.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So there's that one, and then another folk guitar hero, Nic Jones. He did it not once but twice in two quite distinct versions. So it's on his first album, which was called Ballads and Songs, which is that 1971, if I remember correctly?
1970.
1970. And then Nic Jones is the second album. Is that 71 or is that 72?
That's 71.
71, yeah. So there's two very distinct versions on those two different albums.
It's astonishing because you wouldn't dream of doing that now.
No.
I don't think anyone would ever dream of doing that.
No.
Of recording a song on an album, and on your next album doing another version of the same song. Because it's just, but all power to him. He did it, and
absolutely,
no one questioned it. As far as I'm aware, no one questioned it.
No. I think they're both, as I say, they're completely different, but I think they're both fantastic performances, fantastic arrangements. I mean, a lot of people speak very, very highly of his Penguin Eggs album, and for good reason. It's a great album, but I really love those first two. They're he's almost like a completely different musician on those early albums, on particularly those first two. But I really like them. I particularly like the song choice and the repertoire on those first two albums. Yeah.
Yes, it's very, very great.
Yeah.
Any others? Or I've got a long list here, but if you've got any others you want to recommend?
Who else have we got? Who haven't I mentioned? Yeah, I haven't mentioned my former tutor while I was at university. Pete Coe did quite a nice version of this on an album called In Paper Houses. Just him and the bouzouki, which I was chatting with him about this song actually when I used to have when I won tuition with him, and he said he found it in the appendix of Frank Kidson's book Traditional Tunes. So why Frank Kidson didn't like it enough to put it in the main body of the book, I don't know, but there it was. And then Pete's occasional colleague Alice Jones, a friend of ours, also did quite a nice version. That's based on the Castle by the Seas version, that American version, on her.
Oh yeah, the one from Lena Bourne Fish.
Exactly that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because that is such a different. I mean, it's the same story, but it's the framework of it is different because you've got the major melody that's in a kind of almost like a jig time sort of thing, and quite upbeat. It's a very attractive version. If you're looking for versions of this song, that one always jumps out to people, and it's a great one. That one, Castle by the Sea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's on her album, Poor Strange Girl from 2016.
Yes.
I think, and everyone who sings Castle by the Sea basically got it from the recording of Lena Bourne Fish or the book that Lena Bourne Fish's version was printed in, which was the Frank and Ann Warner book, as well. So it's all stems from her basically on that one. Amazing stuff. I wanted to highlight. We mentioned Vic and I mentioned I think a version from Ireland called "False Lover John." Sung by the much missed Kevin Mitchell. I couldn't relate to any of the plot of that one or the song or the melody, but it's if people want to track down, it's on an album that Kevin made a long time ago, and yes, it's a really fantastic different version of the song, basically. Highly recommend that. And the fact that it's not just called The Outlandish Night.
Yeah.
It's called False Lover John. So in that one, the villain of the piece has a name. He's not just the knight or other knight, he's John. Which is interesting, I think. There's two other performances of Castle by the Sea that I rather like. We got Cath Tyler with her partner Phil Tyler, husband, and they did Castle by the Sea, Lena Bourne Fish, and also the Askew Sisters as well. Previous podcast guest Hazel Askew from season 1, and her sister Emily did the Lena Bourne Fish, Castle by the Sea, on their 2019 album Enclosure, which was very good. And the Cath and Phil Tyler, that's a 2009 album called The Hind Wheels of Bad Luck. Also, I want to shout out to, you mentioned Norma Waterson earlier. She did sing The Outlandish Night on one of the various albums by the group, by the group Waterson Carthy, the family group. ostensibly Martin Carthy, Norma Waterson, Eliza Carthy, but then usually a melodeon player as well. I think that's one of the Tim Van Eycken albums. Yes, called A Dark Light from 2002. And I think that's a version in the Cecil Sharp collection, I think Norma said. And then the tune I think she used was in the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, I think, for that one. But she said, quite a few are looking at comparing the various sleeve notes that turn up on the Mainly Norfolk page for this song, and the name Fred Jordan turns up quite a lot, and in people not learning it from him, but in terms of first hearing it, a lot of people seem to have heard it first from Fred Jordan, the Shropshire traditional singer, and rightly so. I mean, Fred Jordan, great singer. Shout out also to Shirley and Dolly Collins did it on their album 1970. Again, same year as Ballads and Songs, Nic Jones. Shirley and Dolly Collins on the album Love, Death and the Lady. But that's Shirley singing accompanied by Dolly on the flute organ. And it's one of those albums with all the early music instruments, the sack butts and the bass viols and things.
Yeah.
Uncredited male chorus includes Royston Wood of the Young Tradition.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Amazing. But yeah, would always highlight Shirley and Dolly Collins, and just Shirley Collins in general. And actually, we have coincidentally, we can big up a couple of future guests on episodes here. We have coming up later in this. No one knows this yet, but coming up later in this season. In the anti-penultimate episode, the third to last episode of this season, we'll be covering Roud 28, which is child number 17, a ballad called Hind Horn. And for that, the singing guest for that is a woman called Rachel Newton. And she's in the Furrow Collective with Emily Portman, who was on last season, and Alistair Roberts, who will be coming up in about 4 episodes' time on this season as well. So I'm trying to collect all of the members of the Furrow Collective, obviously. But Rachel Newton had an album in 2020 called To the Oar, AWE, To the Oar. And yes, that's an American version from Massachusetts, I think, rather. That one's called The Early Morning, I think she called it. I don't know whether that's the name that it was collected from Massachusetts. And it's in Bronson as well, if anyone wants to go diving around in Bronson for the early morning version. But Rachel Newton, will talk to her in about 7 episodes' time. And also bigging up a future Patreon guest. We're currently in the middle of a Singer's Choice mini-season over there with Mossy Christian having picked 3 songs. And our next Singer's Choice guest is also linked, we've been talking about, is the great singer Rachel McShane. And she was in Bellowhead.
Bellowhead, yes.
Or is in Bellowhead. I don't know. They broke up, but they still tour. So is it was or is? That's a tricky one, that one. Maybe I'll ask her.
Yeah.
But she has been and still is in the band Bellowhead, playing cello and harmony vocals and things. And Rachel is joining us on the Patreon for 3 episodes as a Singer's Choice guest with her choice of 3 songs. And she did sing a version of the Outlandish Night on her album in 2018 with her trio, the Cartographers, the album called When All Is Still. And that's a version from the Alan Lomax book, I think, The Folk Songs of North America. And she wrote in her sleeve notes, there was much discussion when we arranged this song about whether to keep the parrot verses. Matthew, who was Matthew Ord, the guitarist in the trio, was initially anti-parrot, but in the end, the parrot prevailed. After all, how often do you find a song that ends with "in the bribery of a sentient parrot"? I mean, you know,
Young Hunting.
Well, I mean, yes. Well,
I see your Outlandish Night, and I raise you Young Hunting.
Exactly. Well, if people are still listening to this podcast around November of this year, 2025. In the middle of season 5, we will come to Young Hunting.
There you go.
To a parrot. And indeed, Vic Gammon will be doing the history of that song.
There you go.
He obviously likes parrots. And men who get their comeuppance from strong women. What does that say about him? I don't know. But yeah, Parrots Young Hunting. There you go. So, but maybe that's 2 out of 47,000 songs that involve sentient parrots.
And I sing both of them.
Do you? Well, there we go. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Okay. Obviously, I like strong women and parrots as well.
Strong women and sentient parrots.
Yeah.
There's should write a tune called that, I think. Strong women and sentient parrots. Anyway, we better leave this there. That's a good lot of recommendations. I'll put all those links to as many of those that I can find in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting about this, and it's a really fascinating idea and project, and the what your current album is based on, and hope that continues with more stuff. Have you got a plan to sort of continue that, or is this just like a one-off album thing?
I mean, like I said, there's a huge amount of repertoire that I've found that it's untapped repertoire, and an album I can only put so much on it. So there's loads more material in the bank. Whether I make a Play Up the Music 2 kind of remains to be seen. I have other ideas that
son of Play Up the Music.
I like it.
Great grandson of Play Up the Music.
Yeah, no, I have other ideas for things that I might do with some of the songs, but they're in a quite a different setting. So yeah, there might be other things exploring the same idea and repertoire.
Nice, cool. And so, if people want to see you live, for example, have you got any gigs coming up from the date of this episode airing? What have you got coming up in the pipeline?
Yeah, so from the end of February, I am starting my solo tour. That goes from late Feb and continues into April, with gigs through late Feb into March and into April. And then from the end of April into May, we're on tour with Granny's Attic. And then I'm back out solo in June, and then more stuff later on in the year in all the different guises. And yeah, all the details will be on my website and my social media pages and the Granny's Attic website. So yeah, you can see more there.
We'll put links to those in the show notes. Amazing. Well, thanks so much for doing this.
Very welcome.
It's been very great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll have you back. Certainly, I want you on the Patreon at some point in the future for a Singer's Choice mini season of 3. So you can pick whatever songs you want, and but I'm sure we'll come to another song in the Roud Index numerically going forward in the Roud Index. But in the meantime, Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt Quinn.
There was a tall and handsome man, he came a-courting me. Set still out after dark tonight, and come a-riding with me, come a-riding with me. You may ride your milk-white steed, and I will ride my apple bay. We'll ride out from my mother's house, just 3 hours till day, until day, just 3 hours till day. So I mounted on my milk-white steed, he rode his apple bay. We rode out till we come to the seaside, then my lover did say, he did say, then my lover did say. Sit down, sweetheart, he said, listen you unto me. Pull off that golden robe you wear, fold it over your knee, oh your knee, fold it over your knee. Well, I asked him why my golden robe must be folded over my knee. He said it's both too fine and costly for to rot in the sea, for to rot in the sea. So I said, oh sweetheart, carry me back, my darling mother, to see. For I'm afraid I'll be drowned in the saltwater sea, in the saltwater sea. But he took my hand and dragged me on into the ocean so deep. I said, oh sweetheart, carry me back, the water's up to my feet, water's up to my feet. But he took my hand and dragged me on, crying, sweetheart, sweetheart, we soon will be across it now. We've reached the deepest part, reached the deepest part. But I sank down in the stream and cried, the water's up to my knee. Take me home, I'm afraid to be drowned in the salt water sea, in the sea, in the salt water sea. But he took my hand and dragged me on, crying, lay your fears aside. We soon will be across it now. We've reached the deepest tide, reached the deepest tide. But I sank down in the stream and cried, the water's up to my waist. He pulled at me and dragged me on, crying, sweetheart, make haste and make haste, crying, sweetheart, make haste. Well, since I'm standing here, I said, afraid that I should die, one kiss from your sweet lips sure would comfort me, sure would comfort me. So he leaned o'er his saddle high to kiss my cheek and my chin, but I've took him by the arm short, there I've thrown him in, there I've thrown him in. And I've caught hold of the tail of my milk-white steed, and he was drowned with his apple bay. I landed back at my mother's house, just an hour till day, just an hour till day. But Polly's sitting up in the window high, on seeing me come she did say, well, what's the matter, my pretty lady, that you rise so long before day, rise so long before day? And my mother said, Polly, who is that that's moving so softly? I say to me, Polly, pretty Polly, don't you tell no tales on me, tell no tales on me. And my mother says, Polly, is that you that's up so long before day? Or there must be a cat at your door, it's old Polly did say, she did say, old Polly did say.
That was Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne singing The Outlandish Night. That brings us to the end of the episode. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the song? I'd love to hear from you. Are you pro-parrot or are you anti-parrot? Or like me, you prefer ex-parrots? If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me an email at intheroud@singyonder.co.uk or visit the podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Just search for In the Roud, a folk song podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you would give us a little rating and review on wherever you get your podcasts from. On places like Apple Podcasts, it's literally a rating out of 5 stars and you can write a review. I imagine that's the same on other proper actual podcast apps, but then if you're listening on YouTube, it's a like button on the episode itself, and you can write comments if you want. Also, I'd very much appreciate it. It's nice to hear from you, and if you can subscribe as well, also very helpful in that respect. That really helps the podcast to reach a wider audience on all the platforms. Over on our Patreon, we are currently in the middle of a Singer's Choice mini-season with singer Mossy Christian, where we are covering 3 songs chosen by him. Across January, we also had an episode on Wassail, with a focus on the song The Gloucestershire Wassail. My guests for that episode were Carol Davis and Jackie Oates. And we also had our first ever Singer Spotlight episode too, where I was joined by American scholar Nora Rhodes to discuss the life of the American traditional singer Emma Dusenberry. If you feel so moved to support the podcast financially, then head on over to patreon.com/intheroud and sign up for either £5 or £10 per month, and you will receive weekly bonus content. This week's Patreon episode, which comes out tomorrow, that's Thursday the 6th of February, I am joined once again by Vic Gammon as he presents the fascinating history of the classic song Old MacDonald Had a Farm. That's Roud number 745. Sign up to hear this and more at patreon.com/intheroud. Also, a little bit of exciting news for us here at In the Roud. We are now a media partner to Veteran, the traditional music label. And this week's song, The Outlandish Night, is included on 4 of their releases. It features on As I Went Down to Horsham, where it's sung by Gordon Hall, Catch Me If You Can, where it's sung by Carlotte Renals, I've Come to Sing You a Song, where it's sung by Vic Legg, and A Shropshire Lad, where it is sung by Fred Jordan. You can find all these albums and more on their website, veteran.co.uk. One last huge thanks to this week's guests, Vic Gammon and Cohen Braithwaite-Kilcoyne. Join me next week for episode 2 of this season. We will be looking at Roud 22, which is Child Ballad number 5, Gil Brenton. My historical guest will be Helen Lindley, and my singer guest will be Nancy Kerr. Until then, that's it from me. Stay safe, be well, and I'll see you next time in the Roud.